What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Christian Perez, and welcome to another episode of the Vector Podcast. I'm particularly excited today because our guest is actually somebody that I almost feels like I've grown up with this guy. I mean, so much of my career in the military, he's been a part of it from the very beginning. And even now, the field of study that he's in, it ties very closely with everything that we're working on here at Altavom. And anyway, without further ado, our guest today is Michael Bars. Michael, welcome to the podcast, man.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely. So why don't you, no, man, on the contrary, man, it's an honor to have you on, bro. So real quick, so we went to basic training together. From there, we went through airborne school. I mean, dude, we go way back. I mean, this was what, 15, 16, right?
Yeah, 2015. Yeah, March of 2015. I think you're one of the first people I met at 30th AG. Everybody's favorite place in the world.
Dreamland, 30th AG. Yeah, man, it feels like so long ago, but at the same time, there's always a part of me that's I would go back just for at least a second. Maybe not 30th AG in particular, but it'd be nice to just kind of go back and just kind of relive some of those moments, man.
Yeah.
Dude, when you're there, it is the absolute worst. But when you look back, you're like, dude, I did that, man. You remember all, your buddies and just hanging out and just kind of, growing together and getting to where you are now. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely would have been interesting to be a drill or something to kind of peek behind the curtain, see what the, I guess the Oz is, how it's all done behind the curtain. So, but yeah, I definitely would go back just to see.
Great times, man. Great times. So why don't you, let's start by, introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what you're doing, and just in general, man. I know the audience would love to kind of get to know you.
Yeah. So I did 8 years in the airborne infantry. I started out up at 425. I was an 18 X-ray. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for me. But ended up going to Alaska, which was a great opportunity and experience. Spent about 3.5 years up there. Ended up deploying to Eastern Afghanistan, to Nangarhar, in September 2017 to June of 2018. Attached to 2nd Battalion, 10th Group as an uplift guy. And we were just in the thick of it with the ISIS-K fight. At that point in time, we were the infantry guys weren't really doing too much. Mostly just did, in the initial parts of my deployment, did some patterns of life stuff because I was on a recon team. And then I got pulled over to the sniper section. So we're doing a lot of patterns of life. And then we augmented the mortars. So we're shooting a lot of mortars at ISIS-K guys. That was a pretty good deployment. And then ended up going to Fort Bragg to the 8th. And then I did another deployment for the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was pretty crazy. I don't know how it looked on the news, but on the ground is pretty insane. So that was a pretty interesting time in my life. That's where my kind of obsession with drones started too, because the first night we were there, we had a DJI drone, which is the most commercially available drone that you can buy. It flew overhead, and I realized that a platoon of 30 infantrymen didn't really have a solution for this drone that's flying above us. And at the time, I had seen videos of ISIS guys in Iraq dropping frag grenades on people. So that was my main concern. But the only solution we had was a shotgun, and I don't think that would have worked as well as we thought it would have. And at that point in time, I was oh, we really need to start thinking about what the next section of warfare, what the future warfare is going to look like. And then we didn't really have any more drone incidents there. Unfortunately, we lost the 11 Marines, one PsyOps guy, and then one corpsman. But we went back to Bragg and business as usual. And then the Russians invaded Ukraine. And I remember saying in the platoon sergeant's office to another squad leader, they haven't even hit the IED portion of this warfare. So I don't know what that's going to look like. But when they do, it's going to be absolutely traumatic to the Russians because they just don't have the tactics to kind of deal with that, as we saw in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s. And it ended up being these flying IEDs, which are the drones that are just absolutely dominating the battlefield. And that sparked even more of my interest. And then I started to study drones while still in the military. I got out. I went and got a master's degree at the University of Alabama at Birmingham in management of information systems. It was a master's in science. And then I got accepted to a local PhD program here at Pensacola at University of West Florida. It's called the Intelligent Systems and Robotics. And I've just been studying drones from there in AI. So just trying to be on the cutting edge of the battlefield. Right now, I feel like the U.S. is essentially going through what we went through when the machine gun was invented. And we don't really know what to do with it quite yet. We're not prepared for this drone warfare. And as you can see in what's going on with Iran, with these Shaheds, there's really no defense against them. I mean, we're talking about $20,000 drones knocking out $2 million facilities and more. We're using, I think the Patriot missile systems, $2 to $3 million. We're using those against these Shahed drones. So the spreadsheet warfare essentially that's going on right now really needs to be figured out and studied. So that's really what I'm trying to focus on. Trying to be on the cutting edge of the battlefield for the warfighter in a different capacity as a academic now.
Bro, that is fantastic stuff, man. And there's a lot to unpack there. And I want to go back and let's start from the beginning, and then we're going to work our way over to where you are now and what you're doing. So let's start first with your interest in joining the military in the first place, right?
Yeah.
That, I think, in and of itself requires a very particular type of individual. You have to have a certain sort of personality, a particular drive to say, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. Where did that all start? Where did that passion or that drive to join start?
It's really all I've ever known. I was actually born on a military base in the United Kingdom. Both my parents were in the military at the time. I was born in Lakenheath in the United Kingdom, and then ended up going to spend about 2.5 years there, and then moved to Grand Forks, North Dakota. I lived in a town of about 800 people, and then went back to the European theater at the largest base over there at Ramstein. And I lived there for about 5 years, and then after that, we moved to Florida to Hurlburt Field, which is the home of Air Force Special Operations. It's basically the brag of the Air Force. But I mean, being in and around the military is all I've ever known. I had a lot of drive to do stuff at, the infantry level, or like try out for special operations, just because I've just always had a lot of drive. In high school, I did, my dad said I had to pick a sport. So I picked mixed martial arts. And so I did mixed martial arts boxing, which is very akin to the military. And then after a while, the itch never went away, because it's really all I ever wanted to do was be in the military and be like, particularly like in a sniper position, or like in the airborne community or special operations. But it's just the whole drive of it really was all I've ever known. And then, I mean, even getting out of the military, I tried the corporate thing and it just wasn't for me. So being around warfighters and working for warfighters is all I've ever really wanted to do. So that's mostly where that comes from.
And so now, all right, so why the Army?
Originally I wanted to do combat control, but I'm really bad at swimming. So I decided to do the 18 X-ray route. And then that transitioned into the infantry. But the Army, I think, just has like the best options to go do things. Like you're never going to be like tethered to, I guess, just like a boat or anything. Like you're going to be able to go on the ground. I think there's a lot more options to do things within the Army, because you're just not like pigeonholed into one thing. Like the Army is really like a rabbit hole. And it's a really good organization. I mean, it gets a bad rap sometimes, but it's what you make of it in a lot of ways.
So now we fast forward a little bit after selection, after all of that stuff, and you find yourself in an infantry unit. You're getting ready to train up you're training up for your first deployment. What was that like for you?
Yeah. So I arrived in Alaska, and I was at the line for about 2 weeks, and then I went to scout selection. And like the difference in quality of like people from a line unit to a scout platoon is just so. Scouts are usually a cut above, and I don't think there was ever a point in time where we weren't like training to be like better and better. Like a lot of guys ended up going to special operations. My first deployment, we really didn't have a whole lot of time, just because like that's, I believe, it's like right after the election, and like the ISIS, that whole like fight was starting up. So we weren't really sure if during that point in time, if we were going to shut down or deploy. So it was just kind of like on the table that we would deploy, but we were all just constantly locked in. Like we were always at the range. We were always doing mountaineering. Like on the weekends, like a lot of my friends and I would be out, we'd be mountaineering, or like just doing stuff that was basically like lifestyle driven as like a good soldier. It just overall just trying to be a more lethal warfighter. And then went down to JRTC and did that whole rigmarole that everybody does when they get ready to go deploy. And then finally deployed, and then wasn't really at all what I thought it would be. It was a lot. I thought, I don't know why I thought this, but I thought it was gonna be like the movies where it's just like constant gunfighting, but it's just constant boredom over there, but yeah, I was part of a platoon that was super locked in. Like we were very professional about everything we did. A lot of guys had Ranger tabs and like mountaineering badges and stuff like that. So it was a very professional platoon.
Gotcha. Now, during actual deployment, was that where you got your CIB?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Now, well, first of all, let's talk through, for the audience that doesn't necessarily know exactly what a CIB is or anything like that. If it's cool with you, I mean, is it something that you'd be willing to discuss, kind of like what happened, how that all works, and generally just like, your story?
Yeah. Got over there, got attached to 10th Group, and we're out at OP Bravo. And then it was mostly just from firing mortars, to be honest. Like we were just shooting so many mortars at dudes that they just gave it to us, to be honest. But nothing too crazy. We got in a few gunfights, but it was like at that point in time, guys were like just shooting from such a far distance, and then we would engage them, and then they'd be gone by the time like anything went on. But it was mostly just from shooting mortars and doing patterns of life stuff, and that we were awarded that, but nothing like insane. The 10th Group guys were really getting into it, though, especially with the combat controllers, because the combat controllers were dropping more ordnance, I think, in that one valley than all of Iraq and Syria combined at that time, which is like insane. But yeah, it's mostly what it was from, just mortars.
I hear you, man. And I can tell you, like, at least like with our combat controller, without a shadow of a doubt, man, those guys stayed busy on our deployments.
Oh, yeah.
It was unreal to see how like just nonstop ordnance dropping, which was, I mean, it was great,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, that seemed like an exhausting job. 24/7, you're constant on.
Yeah, I don't think they sleep, man, because ours he'd be like half awake all the time. And our combat controller ended up getting a Silver Star. They were doing a KLE with this group of guys. They're called the People's Uprising Militia, and it was very obviously they were obviously the Taliban. And they got, after we had basically like pushed ISIS out of Momin Valley, they backfilled with this PUM, People's Uprising Militia. Our 18 Alpha, one of the leaders of this militia, our combat controller, our interpreter, were all on like a you remember those side by sides? They were like driving away. They were driving away after they had tea with these people, and then one guy just picked up a PKM, started spraying at this vehicle, and then our 18 Alpha got hit in the shoulder. It traveled down to his liver. He ended up having to learn how to walk again. It was that bad. I mean, getting hit with a PKM round sounds terrible. Our interpreter got hit in the foot, and then the only person they ended up killing was the militia leader, and then our combat controller actually took control of the situation. And he directed fires and then came back to the base. I was cool with him because I was an Air Force brat, so I was always like nice to the Air Force guys. So I was like, oh, dude, are you okay? And I like blood swept him, and he was good. And then he ended up rolling in like 2 Vipers and dropping 500-pound bombs after the warrant told him to do it. But I mean, it was just that type of environment for those guys. But yeah, he was a stud. I mean, combat control's got a very special place in my heart. We actually did a fundraiser at my dad's brewery last weekend for one of them, to try and get him some stem cells. Like, really good guy. You might actually know him. I'll say his name after the podcast, but I think he was around the same time as you in Afghanistan. But yeah, those guys are amazing. I have a lot of love for the combat controller and TACP community.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. Now, moving forward, now you find yourself later deployed again. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And this was now for the Afghanistan withdrawal. So let's talk about that, right? How much time spanned between your first deployment and then the Afghanistan withdrawal?
I got out of the first deployment in 2018, and then ended up going to Bragg in 2019, and then for August of 21. So it had been about 3 years. And then I had a couple of like SF buddies, like you. I think you had gone over after me, and then Andrew from basic training. He was a 10th group guy. He was actually one of the last guys out of Bagram. We actually he came and saw me at Bragg, and then I had to tell him that I was leaving. But yeah, I think it was like 2 or 3 years span. But dude, I could have told you like the first 2 weeks of that first deployment, I was like, this is not going to work out for us, just because of some of the things I was seeing over there, like a lot of logistical issues. And then I would do radio guard all the time, and I would listen because all the 10th group guys were calling up, and they were like constantly taking over missions from the Afghans, unfortunately, like because they would like botch breaches or like something went awry. And I just like, dude, I don't know how this is going to work out. And then they could only trust one of the tribes to do the logistics. I think it was the Hazaras. They can only trust those guys to like hand out like halal meals and stuff. And I was like, dude, this isn't like at all how I thought this war was going. And even at OP Butler, I remember walking past like where all the ODA guys were kind of like huddled up, and they were doing like writing like a sit tap or something to send back to the CJ SOTIF. And I remember hearing the 18 Alpha say, you guys got to give me something so I can make this sound good. And I was like, that doesn't sound good. So, I mean, even on that deployment, I knew like inevitably that withdrawal would I didn't think it would be that bad, but I was like, I don't think we're going to come out of this country like unscathed like we think we are. But to answer your question, I think it was about 2.5 years, 3 years after, but I kind of like felt in the air that this would eventually happen.
So you land in Afghanistan for the withdrawal.
Yep.
What is the vibe on the ground? What does it feel like? Just how sort of attuned is everybody to everything that's going on? Was it just sheer mayhem, or was there some modicum of order?
There was a lot of order. So we landed, we actually had only 30 minutes notice. So we were actually out in the field training, and it was such a mess to even get over there, dude. We were out training at Kulaconch on Bragg, and it was like we had guys actually ECATing during the training, and then we went back. And then as we were driving back, we started getting alerts on our phones, and we were already, the 82nd operates on it's called IRF, which is it's like America's 911, and we have a 2-hour sequence. So we were already an hour and a half into this 2-hour sequence when we got this alert. So we really had like 30 minutes, and we end up going back to the company, and I was like, I don't know if this is real. I don't know if this is happening. And I knew it was real when the chaplain would start handing us Gatorades. I was like, oh, we're gone for sure. And then end up going to RFI, and I didn't even get any of the gear I was supposed to get. So I actually deployed to Afghanistan with training plates that had probably been dropped like 100 times, probably super like fractured. But yeah, we basically get on a C-17 out of JBC for about 24 hours. We go to fly to Ryan, Maine, and then fly into Qatar, and then we fly into Kabul. And I don't know like what. I didn't really know what to expect. I was like, I didn't know what to tell my dudes because I was a fairly new squad leader. I was like, just, like ROEs, all like that usual stuff. Like, don't be like immoral. You know what I mean? I honestly thought we were going to be in a tick right away coming off the bird. We ended up landing, and I'm like nothing was really going on. And of course, the Marine Corps was already there. So, from the embassy, they came over. But we landed, and I kind of looked around. The 160th was kind of like off, like right next to us. They're putting together one of their Chinooks, and then I could see like into the terminal, all the contractors kind of like gaggled up, like they were in a pretty chill posture, and then Marines were pulling security. But there was definitely like a intensity to the air. And then as we went to the terminal, we met up with one guy that one of my buddies had known from a previous life somehow, and he was getting stuff from the embassy, and the embassy was like it was getting pretty wild over there. They had like backed up toilets, and there was like sewage everywhere. And then they were like, one of the Apaches ended up dropping a Hellfire missile or Hellfire rocket to get rid of a portion of the embassy. I believe that happened. And then I think they were like emptying the vaults and stuff. So the embassy was definitely in chaos, but at the airport, it was fine. At that point, we were getting situation reports that the Taliban was like 10K out. So there was definitely like this intense, like we didn't know how it was going to go down with them. We didn't know if there was a deal made, like worked out or anything, but we could definitely feel there was like a certain like uneasiness, and like it would eventually devolve into a not a great situation, which that was the next day. But we ended up getting on Chinooks and then going over to Camp Alvarado, which is on Hamid Karzai International Airport. That's where we landed. Is called HKI, Hamid Karzai International. And Hamid Karzai was the first president of Afghanistan after the 2001 invasion. We go over there, and I basically start like looking for like belt-fed weapons and stuff, because we really didn't have a lot of stuff. And like we were very underprepared. I actually listened to a podcast recently about the Marines, and they were like way more prepared than we were. But we were like cross-loading ammo and stuff. Like we didn't even have enough ammo over there. I obviously didn't have my gear. Yeah, it was just a mess. And then the next day that's when like the most like notorious day of like people falling off planes and all that. But initially when we got there, it was calm, but there was a certain intensity in the air that you could feel.
So you talk about this shift that happened in this sort of like environment, right? So you're talking about there's tension in the air, and then this suddenly sort of like crescendos into what was sort of the iconic, ignominious, and just horrific day that the whole world saw.
Yeah.
When did that shift happen? How did that play out?
So basically like kind of stayed up all night, just kind of pulling security. And then in the very early morning before the sun even came up, we ended up getting sent to towers because there was these Gurkha contractors there, and we were like switching out with them so that they could go back to Nepal or wherever they're going to go, the UK, wherever. So we take towers. This is probably about like 6 a.m. And then I got my other buddy in another tower. He's probably like 100 to 200 meters down the way. And then we're on like these Roshan phones, and I'm like calling him. I'm not really sure like what we're supposed to be doing, all this. That was initially calm. And then I ended up getting switched out with this artillery private. And this is kind of a funny story, but she asked her staff sergeant, she had to open up the bulletproof glass to shoot out of it. And I was like, do you want me to like give her a class? He's like, no. And then we're like walking further down the stairs, and then she like kind of yells down. She's like, how do I take this off safety? And I'm like, oh man. So it was like, it's kind of a funny story, but I was like, wow, people are like very underprepared to be here. And then we ended up going back to the rooms that we had occupied, the chews. And then I like put my head down, and I'm like asleep for like 30 minutes. And they're like, hey, we need to go out to the airfield. There's like a bunch of people gathering, because at this point the Taliban was like inside Kabul, and they were like taking over Kabul. And we initially get out there, we're in like these Turkish-made up-armored vehicles, and I'm kind of looking out these little like portholes, and I'm like, man, that's a lot of people. And it was like actually not for what was about to happen. And then we end up getting out, dismounting, and starting pulling security. And then as we're doing that, we start getting shots over the head. And then we're like, oh man. So we start taking contact, and then we go occupy this berm. We try and set up a better security position. And I'd say about like that, probably like 6:30, 6:37. That's when like things really started to erupt, because that's at that point the entire city started to come into this airport. All of like Kabul and other people have now started to come into the all into the airport, and probably people from all over the country, because the Taliban like very rapidly like took over Afghanistan kind of so what they were doing is they were like just going to like, I don't know if you remember how it worked, but it was like the districts. They like go to like the district HQs and like say, hey, they would tell those like we're in charge again, because they had basically like defeated the commandos and the ANA. A lot of the ANA surrendered. The commandos like tried their best to hold it down. And they just like basically like blitzkrieg the whole country, and then that like put pressure on all of Kabul, because it basically pulled the entire country into Kabul trying to get out.
So my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you were actually there. My understanding is the Taliban is starting to move in. The commandos, as you described, are basically surrendering. The Taliban is moving back into the city. That's forcing the local population to basically try to flee. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
So at that point in time, the crowds start gathering, starts getting a little bit more hectic in and around, or at least in the periphery of the base. You guys start taking contact. When then do the explosions start?
That actually happened on the 26th, if I recall correctly. The 26th. But on that day, there was really no like contact with them, because the Taliban basically came in. I don't know if there was like a deal made up or whatever, but they kind of just went. They were like in the main terminal. Like one of my buddies got shot at, and then he was standing next to two Marines, and they like immediately were like just absolutely smoked these dudes. They were like on the roof. But there was really no explosion. What I think the Taliban was really exploiting was just the chaos. Like they were just really like thriving in the chaos. There was no real reason to like blow anything up or anything. The guys that ended up doing the suicide bombing were ISIS guys, but the Taliban pretty much knew it was over and they were going to take over. But I mean, during that point, I think that whole day was about 8 hours. as people gathered, they got more desperate. And it was kind of like we were trying to corral them. So there's like a battalion of us, and then like I think there's like a battalion of Marines. I think there had been like 10,000 people on that tarmac, but we were like kind of like just trying to corral them, and they would kind of adjust, like move over, and then it was just like all this corralling, and then that's when eventually the C-17 was like we were trying to guard the C-17. This is the one that they ended up falling off of, but ends up moving to the airstrip, and then all the Afghans basically like get onto this C-17, and then we
Mind you,
think
the outside of the C-17, correct?
yeah, it's actually what this is, the Afghan war rug, but it's from that whole day. But they got on the outside of the C-17. I thought they just had naturally dispersed. So my PL and a couple of my Joeys are like walking adjacent to the tarmac, and then I look over and I thought there was like trash on the side of the C-17. And I look over, I'm like, oh no, those are people, dude. And then we're like watching it. It's like in slow motion, dude. We're like watching the C-17 just like start to go, and like the first guy drops at like 200 meters, and it's like such a dumb question, but I look at my Butterbar PL. I'm like, do you think he's still alive? And my PL's like, no, dude, what? Because these guys like just like dropped off of like the C-17 straight onto concrete. And then from there, they started like bracketing in at like 400 meters. And then one guy, he made it to like 2K. I think he was like caught in one of the gears, which is like a horrible way to go. But he ended up like probably going through somebody's house in Kabul. But yeah, that's like that whole event. Like honestly, at that moment, I started to believe in God, like truly. So I felt like I was like watching the Tower of Babel or something. It was like just so like biblically like cinematic to put it in like a way that probably doesn't really make sense, but that's how I felt at the time. And then yeah, that whole thing happened, and then that day continued probably for another like 3 or 4 hours, and then eventually I heard over the radio that we had, in so many words, we had like made a deal with the Taliban that they were going to take security, which is like horrific because you're essentially surrendering like the lives of a lot of these people to the Taliban. And yeah, they were just like brutal. I mean, from there on out, we basically had a deal with the Taliban where they pulled outside security and then we pulled inside security, and then until we left on the 30th. But for the rest of that deployment, we mostly did like QRF stuff, did like security on the tarmac. We reacted to like breaches because like they're not a Taliban, but the Afghans they just kept trying to get in. They're just so desperate, dude. A lot of them were like interpreters. And then on the other side of base, the Marines were dealing with like what's called Abbey Gate, which is like, that's where that bomb ended up going off. And then on the 26th, that's when all of them died. Those were 11 Marines, and then one PSYOPs Army guy, staff sergeant, and then one corpsman. And then like that was a whole mess because if you listen to like guys like Andrew Vargas, they're like, yeah, I saw the dude and I could have took him out. And there's just the amount of like ambiguity in that whole situation. I can understand how from a battalion commander's perspective, they're like, they can't really like make a quick decision with all the information coming in, but it ended up costing dudes their lives.
So let's talk about that for a second, because
yeah,
I think that's a very crucial point that you're underscoring here, and that is sort of the ambiguity that happens amidst the chaos. The need to make sort of spontaneous decisions, or at least seemingly spontaneous, or as informed as you possibly can.
Yeah.
So, given the situation that was there, or that was unfolding there, what was the ambiguity? What caused what made it so difficult to say, hey, send it, do what you got to do. If you have to pull the trigger.
Yeah. I think a lot of the times, I hate to say this, but like some of these field grade officers are like thinking about, will this cost me my career? I really hate to say that, but that's just like from being around them. I think that's how a lot of them think. And we were getting a lot of reports of like different things. So I think there was such noise in the overall situation. Like we were getting reports that they were going to do a suicide bombing with a white sedan four door. It's like, if you've ever been in that country, like every car is a white sedan four door, like literally all of them. And we ended up retaliating against a suicide bomber. We thought it was, and we hit a white sedan four door, ended up being actually a commando, ironically enough. But just, I think the noise and then like the value of information just really wasn't there. This is actually why I think like AI is really important in the battle space, is because it's going to help commanders make better decisions rapidly, because the value of information is going to be like stacked and deciphered a little bit better and parsed to like people that need to know it. But I think the overall ambiguity came from just the overall noise and confusion, and like that country, it's really hard to explain to people, like, because you've been there, but like it's just such a chaotic place that it's very hard to understand for Westerners. And I think that just the insanity makes people like not make the best decisions sometimes. I can say from our perspective, like my battalion commander, I don't think that guy slept like one night. I don't think he got any sleep because he was just constantly up trying to deal with stuff. And I'm sure the Marine Corps battalion commander was dealing with the same stuff. Just the level of stress those guys were under. I do not envy them. But yeah, I think the overall ambiguity came from the noise.
Yeah, and this is precisely why I asked that question, right? Because at the end of the day, there's so much going on, man. And like you specifically referenced, there's so much information, so much data points coming in from different modalities, from all sorts of different sources. And it's incumbent on one individual to sort of parse through all of that information and make a decision on the spot. a decision that could, in theory, result in the detriment of their career. Now we can go down a whole rabbit hole as to whether or
Yeah.
not this should be the case and why why that's even a possibility, but there'd be a whole another podcast in and of itself. At
Yeah.
the end of the day, though, the underlying, the fact of the matter is that there's a ton of data to sift through. Right now,
Yes.
fast forward, you've had some, combat experience, 2 rotations now in Afghanistan. You've seen it, when it's a little less kinetic, if you will, and now you've also seen it, in the thick of it, where we're relentless chaos. You get back to the States. When did you decide, okay, you know what, it's time to hang up the uniform, it's time to do something else?
Honestly, on that deployment, just because like my family had dedicated so much time to just that war. Like my dad started going to like Uzbekistan, I think in like 2003 to support that war effort, and just seeing how that ended after like 4 presidencies. Like a lot of people wanted to blame the president at the time, but it was 4 presidents that ran that war, man, and like 4 State Departments. But that like really grinded my gears how that all ended, and then having to deal with the 82nd in a peacetime environment with a lot of uncertainty of like what the future of warfare was going to look like. But I knew I wanted to go to school at a higher level academically. Like even when I was in Afghanistan, I was still like I was getting my bachelor's degree. I was actually writing papers in Kuwait the 2 weeks we were there, trying to get that turned in because I was obviously behind because I didn't plan on that happening. But I knew I wanted to go to grad school and then eventually go do this PhD for Intelligent Systems and Robotics. After that deployment was really when I decided. And it was also I ended up signing a deck statement because I didn't want to go to Fairbanks because I got orders at Fairbanks, and I was like, I'm not going back to Alaska just because like I unfortunately dealt with a lot of like suicide up there. Like a lot of my, not friends, but like people in my unit like took their own lives, and I was like, I can't deal with that again because it just kind of like tore me up when I had to deal with it. I was like, I don't want to deal with it at Fairbanks because it was a lot worse. It was bad at Jaybird, but it was a lot worse at Fairbanks just because I think it's the sunlight, honestly, like the lack of sunlight. Guys just make temporary or permanent decisions for temporary environmental changes that they're going through. But yeah, that deployment and then just not wanting to go to Fairbanks, I was like, I'm done. And then, I mean, there's just a lot more on the outside to do, like go to school. Like I've been going to school forever and I've really enjoyed it. So, probably similar idea as you, like why you decided to get out as well. You wanted to pursue like greater things and you are. So
I appreciate it. Now you mentioned your interest in drones. You mentioned that
yeah.
that started while you were basically in the service. So walk us through a little bit more of that. So
Yeah.
what made you choose the field of education that you ended up pursuing? So let's start with your master's program and what
Yeah.
did you get out of that? What sort of key takeaways did you learn there while you were actually taking your master's program and your classes?
Yeah.
But also, I'd be curious to know sort of how much of your experience in the military tied to that, or would you attribute perhaps to some success or some sort of direct correlations or patterns that you were like, oh, you know what, this actually like applies directly, if any at all?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Just, I mean, from the discipline alone, but during that first night, we had that DJI drone come over and it just really like scared me because I just felt like I knew that like drones would eventually be a part of like every infantry platoon, every ODA, but seeing it like from the other side happen to us, it's like essentially like whenever you go to war with America, you have a stack of aircraft, like you have F-16s and like AC-130s and everything. And it gives you a lot of like power in your, whatever you're doing with your mission. While with loitering munitions or drones, it's really democratizing the, that strike capability to anybody really. Anybody can do what we were doing in Afghanistan with AC-130s with a $500 drone. So just seeing that, being on the other side of that for just that one instance and not really having an answer to it, that really like started it. And I was like, I just wanted to take care of the boys and make sure that this doesn't happen to us. And then in February of 22, when Russia invaded, that like kind of started it. Initially, it was all armor columns fighting each other and like street to street stuff. And then eventually, I think that next spring, that's when they kind of ran out of javelins. That's when they started to use loitering munitions or these kamikaze drones that are like right now. I mean, there's some estimates that they're losing about 30,000 soldiers on the Russian side a month, which is insane. And most of those are coming from drones. I think like 70 to 80% of those are coming from just loitering munitions or drones. So just seeing how unprepared we were, and then subsequently how the second best army at the time was not doing well against these. I didn't want this to happen to our guys. And then going into my master's program, it was mostly AI. It was a master's in science management of information systems. So it was a lot of like, it's essentially like an MBA, with a little bit of technical stuff. Like we did a lot of relational databases, AI in business. This is like really right as like ChatGPTs. I think it's like it was on model like 3.5 going into 4. But I knew that AI was going to be a big part of it. And then I also like really paid attention to Palantir. I knew that eventually like what they were doing was very unique, and the fact that like basically nobody in the tech sector wanted to have anything to do with the government really kind of piqued my interest in AI. So that was like my main focus of that master's program. And then I eventually discovered this PhD program out here. And I was just in my hometown, actually in Pensacola, and I was like, this is crazy that there's like this program here. Then ended up meeting with my dissertation advisor now, and he's like really big into like NATO stuff. I just knew there was going to be like the perfect program for me, just to try and be on the cutting edge of the battlefield. And from the military perspective, like for instance, like we're talking about value of information, there's a huge difference between guys like us and then like guys that are on the engineering side. They don't know like what the warfighter needs, what the warfighter wants. And really what I'm trying to do is be the bridge in between the warfighter and the engineer and be like that glue that can help in a lot of ways. Just because I've had two, deployments. I've seen things that no engineer that is working at lab that just, they did academia at a high level, maybe they went to like MIT or something. They're not going to go to Afghanistan. They don't like necessarily know what it's like, or like they're not paying attention to Ukraine or anything like that. But I think like my combat experience has definitely been valuable, and to be the intermediary between the warfighter and the engineer. And then on top of that, I mean, just the discipline of just, waking up every day at 5:30 and going on a 5-mile run with the platoon, that like embedded discipline in you, like to get through grad school, working full time, and then having a 2-year-old, you just know you have to get stuff done, and you're just going to hold yourself to like a higher account, just because that's like just fundamentally from the Army, just knowing like things need to be done. There's like, you can either do it or fail, and like failure's not the best option. It's the most readily available option. You can't fail, but like, you can just suffer and be successful. But I think that's like the big thing for me is just the discipline and the willingness to go above and beyond. But yeah, sorry, go ahead, dude.
No, man, on the contrary. So I think what's particularly striking is how entrenched military and technology are. Now, that sounds relatively obvious, but once you really get into like the nuances, the granularities, then you really start to understand why it matters so much, right? Even something as simple as like, whatever combatants or forces leveraging drones, right? That technology became readily available, and so they leverage it, right? Similarly with artificial intelligence, the same way that we're leveraging it now, there's a myriad of other entities, organizations, combatant groups that are also going to leverage that same technology, right? So that leads me to start thinking about sort of like security systems thinking and these different facets that are integral to cloud architecture, networking, and all these different more complex sort of technological builds. How much of sort of the military mindset when it comes to, your 5 principles of patrolling, your operations order, all these different facets that make up the ideal operation or the best way to sort of format operations, how much of that translates to tech and to engineering and to that field in particular?
I think just knowing like what the end user is going to go through and like why like certain systems may not work for them. And like I saw this a lot in the 82nd. They started putting like all these like crazy like optics devices and stuff, and you could just totally tell like the person that was like designing the stuff had never carried a rifle. And I mean, we had like these M4s. We were putting all this like M320 like optics on them and all these crazy like night vision optics, and like we took a 7-pound rifle and made it into a 20-pound rifle. And I think like just being the guy that's had to carry a rifle and like is now on the other side, like trying to, be a better engineer or be a better academic that's like trying to do research on this stuff. I think that's really important. And then just knowing like I said, like what the end user is going to go through and how they can leverage technology the best. I think now too, like technology is starting to come more and more into the battlefield because we're starting to look at this LISCO environment. And I think not just from the engineering side, knowing what the warfighter has to go through, but I think the warfighter also at some level has to become an engineer themselves. Like I think that like for instance, the loitering munition issue, I don't think that we should be relying on industry strictly. I think that the innovation labs on like Fort Bragg, where they have all these 3D printers, and they are now finally, but they should be the ones developing these loitering munitions. And every like soldier to some extent should be like a mini engineer. So I think that is like the biggest thing that I've taken is there's just such a shift, and technology is becoming more and more relevant, and just knowing like what side, how they think, and being the intermediary, that is what's really important.
How do you feel artificial intelligence is going to shape the battlefield?
I think it's going to lead to better decisions. I think it's going to like the value of information for commanders, and then on down is going to get a lot better. I think the Kill Chain. I don't know if you ever read Kill Chain by Chris Bose.
Fantastic. I highly recommend. I'll post it in the description.
Yeah, and he was writing. I think he wrote that book in like 2016. He was like very ahead of his time. And there's a reason why he's the COO of Anduril right now, which Anduril is like the best company. I think they're going to resolve a lot of issues. They already really are. They're resolving so many issues right now. It's like probably one of my favorite companies to pay attention to. But I think artificial intelligence is going to be a huge thing because it's not only going to help commanders and all the way down to Joe make better decisions, but it's also going to be the brains of loitering munitions and like robotic systems and the just like kind of like the mesh architecture of helping the warfighter make better, not make better decisions, just that, but also enable them to go further and faster.
What point do you think machines should be making decisions autonomously? Where should we draw that line? Let's just say hypothetically that artificial intelligence would have been a factor there. You could at the very least have a sort of like percent likelihood of this being a threat
Yeah.
or not, right? You
Yeah.
need a certain threshold that, I hate to make it so black and white, right? Because we also run the
Yeah.
risk of doing that too. Eventually we start kind of just reading the metrics instead of actually like looking at the scenario.
Yeah.
If the metrics say 70%, then execute. That's also not necessarily the best way to do a thing.
I'm actually a big proponent of human in the loop at all times, but you actually made a really good scenario distinction of this, the 70%. I don't know if we should I don't know. I feel like we could definitely be reducing people down to numbers too much, but there is a certain point where if for scalability reasons, like machines will have to make their own decisions and they're going to have to work autonomously. I don't think that AI is perfect though. We saw that recently in Iran where actually don't know if this is completely true, but the Iranians were painting like stuff on the airfield and possibly because of autonomous systems, we were doing strikes on those just because they had from, just the AI, it looked like it was actually a helicopter, an F5 or whatever airframe. So I don't think AI is completely perfect right now. I am a huge proponent though of humans in the loop. Actually writing one of my papers right now about humans in the loop and the governance behind it. I think that's one of the biggest topics right now with AI in the battlefield is at what point do we just completely let machines run it? And if so, like what are the parameters, what are the left and right limits, if you will?
We're president for a day. Where does the liability rest? Because I think the biggest reason why it's so particularly difficult to just let machines run the thing or just let them, act autonomously is because at some point, what we humans own is the liability, right? It's impossible to hold a machine liable for a mission gone awry, an operation gone awry, or something, detrimental happens. There is no accountability there, right? So
exactly.
how do we square that circle?
I really don't think it should be like just strictly machines making decisions, to be completely honest. Like I'm like against that, to be quite frank, just because like you said, the accountability is not going to be there. And like at the end of the day, who are you going to go like blame? The engineer that designed the model? Like probably not, like because the commander implemented the model. I think that humans should always be in the loop. I'm not pro like just machines making the decisions by themselves. I just think it could lead to a lot of disaster. And like, like we're bringing up like metrics a lot, and that's what unfortunately what happens in warfare. Like we reduce people to numbers a lot, and like a lot of tragedy can come from that when we're just reducing like human life to like statistics and stuff. So I think there should always be a human presence in the decision making. But I think the overall decision making should be better because of the amount of information, the value information that the AI is taking in, and then at the end of that one person should make that decision. One thing that is a huge question though is the scalability. If you look at like Ukraine right now, they're having one operator, one drone, and the drone operators are having to work like so hard because the Russians are, they're doing like the whole like meat shield thing, the old Soviet tactic of like everybody get online and like we're just going to assault through. And what ends up happening because they have just so many more people that, these drone operators, it's not feasible at scale for these guys just to be on, on a controller all day behind goggles. So, I mean, and they're just like watching, they're just blowing people up all day, unfortunately, but it's, they got invaded, the nature of warfare currently. But that's like what the huge question is right now, because they've actually came out with a system called Bumblebee, and it is doing pixel lock and it is making like autonomous decisions. So, we as Americans may already be behind on that decision-making process, and a country that we're essentially using as a proxy may already have that technology. So after this war, if that proliferates to like our adversaries or like non-state actors that want to do us harm, that is like a huge question. And I think at a certain point, like the US obviously has to make autonomous weapon systems. But like you're seeing that right now, the whole Claude debate, like Claude didn't want to give the DoD, but they didn't want to remove the guardrails, but somebody's going to eventually for the right amount. But
and this is why I'm so persistent about the question with regards to where do we draw the line, and at what point do we say, okay, machines can operate autonomously. The reason I say that is because you look, for example, like you were just alluding to the Claude debacle with the government, and you look then at also some of the more novel sort of at-home technologies like OpenClaw and what NVIDIA is going to more than likely announce here during the GTC this week, the NemoClaw, and we also look at a Perplexity personal computer. We're looking at more and more autonomous AI agents in your home. In many cases, they're not even relegated to their own hardware. A lot of people are just simply downloading it and using it in machines in their own personal computers that have access to virtually anything and every bit of data that they've ever compiled in their entire life. So you look at this technology, you say, okay, this is available now to the general public. Like we're not even talking about secret, top secret, anything of that nature, right?
Yep.
So I don't necessarily fear it, but I do foresee is more and more machines making decisions on their own, despite the fact that what we're actively sort of looking for is a way to keep that human in the loop. So let's just say we continue down this trajectory. Do you think it's inevitable for warfare to eventually be autonomous,
Yeah.
or is that just way too out of the ballpark? Like, it's a difficult sort
No.
of
Yeah.
scenario to envision, but at the same time, it's like, okay, well, if warfare is autonomous robots, then how do you win? How do you lose? What becomes the currency? Because as of today, the currency in theory of warfare is human life. Right?
Yeah.
The deterrent to go into a war is loss of life in many cases.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the unfortunate reality is we have to do it because our near peer adversaries are doing it. I mean, the Russians are doing it, the Chinese are doing it. We're already seeing it with the Iranians. These Shaheds are essentially autonomous because they have like internal navigation units, and they're just using these loiter missions to just mass produce chaos. You've seen it right now in Dubai. But yeah, our near peer adversaries are using it, so it's inevitable that we do have to do it, which is unfortunate. But like you said, these models are already out in the open and they can be distilled for specific purposes. So I think it is unfortunate inevitability. I know I read today that the Ukrainians are going to start fielding humanoid robots on the front line. So I mean, I hate to say this because it's like such a doomsday thing, but like we are getting closer to Terminator. And I think just from what I've seen in Ukraine, I've seen like machine on machine battles of drones, like a loiter mission hitting a UGV, so unmanned ground vehicle, and it's like that is like so close to like Terminator. You know, it's essentially Terminator versus Terminator. And the reality too is because of Nixon and Henry Kissinger, we completely got rid of all of our production capability and we shifted to China. And because of that, they've subsequently had the ability to mass produce things, whether it's drones or UGVs. Dude, honestly, like half of the papers I read about UAS systems, they have like Chinese names on them. And so it's like it's scary as an academic to read that and to see how much more serious about like whether it's like mesh autonomous systems or like just UAS systems or like these novel ideas have like Chinese names on them. And yeah, it's an inevitability, unfortunately, that we will have autonomous warfare.
Would you mind elaborating on that to the audience? Just why is that a particular concern? I understand the concern, and I'm with you on it. But I
Yeah.
would love for it's not necessarily the most generally available piece of information. And we're not necessarily getting into anything unclassified or anything, but like, why is that a particular concern for it to be predominantly Chinese names on some of this technology?
They're just taking it way more serious, in my opinion. And I mean, China, if you look at their cities, I mean, they're building an empire again. I mean, they're like on their fifth or sixth empire, and they're like, they have a culture too that's like very like pro learning and pro like academia versus us. Like you have like people that brag about not using y equals mx plus b. You know, like we have like a culture that's like anti-education in a lot of regards, like very. And like, I don't think that's good, but like a lot of these like novel ideas are being fielded in China. And then they have this like hybrid system where, they are communists, but they're also like ultra capitalist. So they can like really not just force their people to do what the government wants in order to have like war fighting systems versus like you see in our technology sector, like Google doesn't want to work with the DoD, Microsoft, they're like iffy, like a lot of these companies, Apple's not against it. Like a lot of these they're against it. But a lot of these companies, these big tech companies, just don't want to work for the government, and that's like why Palantir like came to be. Is like Joe Lonsdale and Alice Karp were like, we have to do something to help the government, and because a lot of these bigger like prime companies just really aren't doing it, and they're not coming up with novel ideas. But yeah, the Chinese, they have a better system for producing warfighter technology because I think that they have like a real high like strain of nationality that we don't have anymore, unfortunately. And then on top of that, they just have the ability to produce things. And then the bureaucracy, despite it being a communist country, the irony is like they have way less bureaucracy than we do. They can like go from flash to bang a lot quicker than we can and just come up with a novel idea and produce it without having the government in between them if it's overall helping the CCP become better.
Right. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, all intellectual property is basically state owned, right?
Yeah. And then,
yeah.
I mean, and then they steal all of our IP. So
right. So, yeah. That's
so I mean, like, yeah. So I mean, just to like further that point, and I'm sure like this because you're in technology, but like research and development is like I think 70 to 80% of the cost of anything. Like, so for instance, for artificial intelligence, we've developed all these models, and then they're just getting like sent to China. They're getting distilled, and then they're getting sent to the CCP, and that's how you have like their AI models. Like I can't remember the name of the one that came out, but it was outperforming like ChatGPT.
There's DeepSeek. There's DeepSeek.
Yeah, DeepSeek. Yeah. DeepSeek. I mean, and you're seeing like they're like really smart people. I mean, they're really good at math, and that's like a really big part of AI or like computer science in general. So, and they have a better overall like vision towards what they want for their country, and then they also have a lot of nationalism, and they're just like they're pro like education. So I think that's like a huge advantage that they have.
I want to talk about that a little bit because I think it's an incredibly important point, and that is the point of culture, right? You talk about Chinese culture being very pro education, very, hey, like you work hard, you strive to be successful, you strive to be incredibly intellectual. Would you say that that's different than the culture in the United States? And if so, how do we address that? How should we start shifting that mentality?
Yeah. Well, I think that America has a really good like hustler culture where they're like, like for instance, like you got out of the military and immediately start doing stuff. So as did I. So there's like guys like every American has like this like strain of entrepreneurship or like the desire to make money. But I also think there's like the individual like freedom part kind of like leans into not wanting to do what's best for overall society, where China doesn't really have that issue. They want to do what's best for the Han Chinese and the CCP. How do we fix that? I think we just have to be more. I don't know if it's like at a Department of Education level, but we have to get back to like going to the moon. Like the fact that we like put people on the moon, whether people want to believe it or not, that inspired a lot of people to like want to go get engineering degrees, want to go do like cool stuff. And I think we just have to get back to that. I think we have to make it cool to like be educated, and we have to like our institutions have to be like great again. Like, like not saying like Harvard or MIT's not, but I think, we have to make it so that like getting an education is like not mandatory, but it's like not like frowned upon like it kind of is now. But also the cost of education has to go way down. Like if you look at a lot of, and I see like the president of my school, I go to a small state school. This guy's getting paid $600,000. He has like a stipend of like $25,000 to go to like a country club or something. He has all these like crazy, exorbitant like bonus packages, and it's what that at scale at the academic level is leading to the cost of education being so high. We have to bring down the cost of education so that like young kids aren't being like absolutely saturated with student loans, and they're not like looking at years of debt in order to go get like an engineering degree or something. Like we have to make it more affordable. The overall culture needs to change. It has to be cool. I think stuff like SpaceX is like a good example, because like seeing a rocket get caught by like two like mechanical arms is awesome. And I think we are going to get back to that. It unfortunately might take like a shock and awe, like 9/11 event to get people serious about like nationalism again, which I hope that doesn't happen, but yeah.
And I think that's a crucial, that right there is a word that I was not necessarily looking for, but I think that word that you chose there is the one that I think is particularly important, and that is a sense of nationalism, right? It's like,
Yeah.
if you can't imagine striving to be the best individual that you possibly can be in order to produce the best possible outcomes when you're disillusioned by the country that you're in, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And one of the things, the two sort of scenarios that you painted here are actually somewhat dichotomous, but at the end of the day, they resulted in the same thing, right? So we're talking about 9/11. 9/11 brought about perhaps one of the worst days in American history, but still brought the country together. And then we also look at putting people on the moon having a very similar effect. It had it resulted in this sense of nationalism wherein the entirety of the country was focused on one thing, one goal, one aspiration. So at the root of that, though, of course, no one wants the 9/11, but at the root of putting someone on the moon is ambitious people trying to solve difficult problems, right? So how do we instill then that sense of wonder? This is where I love sort of like some of the ad campaigns that like Claude has put out, or Anthropic rather has put out with, there's never been a better day to have a problem, solve difficult things, keep learning, I think that's brilliant, but I think it comes back down to precisely what you were describing is the education system, the culture, parents at home. Like, how do we instill that sense of wonder and awe and imagination in our youth?
You just said it perfectly. Like I think it starts with at home. It really does, and we have to start telling our kids they can be astronauts again. I bring my kid so I live down the street from the Naval Aviation Museum, and I bring my kid there like 30 times a year. I'm not even lying. And we go look at all of the planes, and then we go to the other hangar bay, and we go look at there's like this little setup where it's like the astronauts on the moon. I'm like, do you want to be an astronaut one day? He's like, yeah. He's like 2. He's about to turn 3 here in a couple days. But we have to like get back to that, telling kids they can be astronauts, because telling kids they can be TikTok influencers is not going to fly for the long term, like the health of this nation. We have to like start telling our kids that they can be, chess grandmasters, or like, the probability you go to the NFL is very low, but the probability of you being an engineer that can do great things is much higher. We have to get back to that. We have to be realistic about that. And like parents have to be more involved in education. They have to take their kids' grades serious. Look at like Indian families, like Brahmin Indians, they're like on top of their kids about their grades. Same thing like Han Chinese, and like, but we have to be the same way. Like we really have to be on top of our kids about their grades and like making them care about school, and not overwhelming them with pressure, but we have to have parental involvement. I think that's like, you've talked to Dan Holloway before. That's like one of the things he harps on too, is like one of the biggest indicators of somebody's success is parental involvement. And I think like parents got to be like really involved, and that has to be like a cultural thing. I don't know how we do that, how we get parents involved in their kids' lives academically, but I think the culture of academia needs to change. Like we have to, like you're seeing it now with like a lot of the school stuff. Like everybody thinks college is woke or like whatever, which like sure to some extent, but like that's resulted in us basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater, where we're taking some of our top institutions, we're saying like these are no longer relevant things, when the reality is like these institutions like Harvard and all these other places built America. Like all the GIs that stormed the beaches of Normandy came back and went to Harvard and then built this amazing country, and then subsequently like we're living in it. And that was because these institutions were so crucial, because that they are important. And then what did those parents that went to those schools do? They made sure that their kids went to college and they had a good education and they did things that mattered. So I think that's essentially what we have to get back to, is parental involvement, not being angry towards academia and taking it seriously. And you don't have to go to college, but like just being like intellectual and like educated, whether it's like actually academia or like self-educated, but like taking these things serious, and just having an overall mentality of like you can go be an astronaut, because the likelihood that you're going to go to the NFL or like be a TikTok influencer is not going to be very high. So we have to be realistic about what we want for our kids.
On the topic of parental involvement, how involved do you think parents should be in AI?
As far as like learning about it, or like, I think they should be very, because I don't think there's ever been a parental group in the history of the world that's going to have more rapid shift in their children's lives than what we're about to experience with AI. You're talking about like open or Claudebot or OpenClaw, like we're just talking about that. Like you and I know what that is, but I talk to a lot of like people and they don't know what it is. But it's like the AI agents are going to be like such a big part of everybody's lives. Now we're already seeing this like IoT devices, like your fridge is an IoT device now. So with that being said, if it can connect to the internet, it's eventually going to be agentic AI that can tell you like, like what groceries you need, stuff like that. So there's just going to be this rapid shift. I think every single parent needs to be extremely well aware of what AI can do, how it could benefit or not to your child's life. They have to learn about it. And then, it's really, you have to keep up with it. And it's the same issue with like legislation. Like the legislation can't keep up with the innovation. And we're seeing that right now. Like these geriatrics that are in Congress just don't know anything about AI. I mean, I'm sure you know that, but it's like they're just some of the questions they ask are just so ignorant. But like that's at the legislative level, but at your home, that's like your domicile, and like you can control that. You have to know what's going on with AI, just even to protect your child. If you look at like Roblox, that's like a huge issue apparently, which I was unaware of. But like parents don't know about like Roblox, and like people going on Roblox and like being like predatory or whatever towards children. It's like it's kind of similar where like parents are unaware of this, and it's just because they're not educating themselves. So they definitely have to be more educated, and they have to be very involved in AI, and like just not from that perspective, but it's going to be a rapid shift in your child's life. It's going to be probably a huge part of your child's life, whether it's like them growing up into their professional careers in school. I mean, school's going to be huge. There's going to be a lot of issues with AI in school. We're already seeing that, but yeah, they have to be way more educated on it.
Now, you're a father, so with your experience and with your intentions and your sort of the goals you have for your kid, how soon would you want him to be exposed to AI? I'm not saying just like, hey, here's ChatGPT, send it, dude. I'm saying just starting to learn about the tech. At what point do you think is it too early? Is it too late? A lot of people talk about sort of like the sort of similarity between the advent of the calculator and whether or not that should have been introduced early or late. What's your opinion with regards to AI and how early it should be introduced to your child's life?
Say honestly, like right when they start school, just from like a math perspective of like trying to explain like what are like linear regression is. And then like you said, like culture, and like parental involvement, because AI is going to be such a big part of their lives going forward, I think it would be beneficial for them to know right away, just from like I said, a math perspective of like, this is how like this works. This is going to be a huge part of your life. This is why this matters. So I would like almost like tandem it to like their already whatever their curriculum is with AI, because the reality is, I mean, it's going to be such a big part of their lives going forward that you might as well not expose it to them as soon as you can, like with safeguards, obviously, from the perspective of being a good parent. But I think almost immediately, just because they're going to have to react to it. And if they're not ready for it, they might not know how to react to it. And it's, like I said, for the fifth time, it's going to be such a big part of their lives going forward. It's going to dominate society for better or worse.
Now, I'd love to talk a little bit about what you're doing now. Your PhD program, what are you working on? What are your sort of aspirations as you move forward in your career?
So right now, Christian and I were actually talking about this before we got on, but I'm mostly working on MANEA radios. So the Persistent Systems MPU-5 or like the Silva Streamcaster, they're like these essentially tactical routers that connect to IoT devices. So if you have a router in your house and it connects to your phone, router, IoT device, it's essentially the same thing in the battlefield. Like you have this MPU-5 or Silva system, and they're connecting to IoT devices, which are unmanned ground vehicles or UAS systems, or like anything that's in the mesh. And on top of that, you're connecting to other warfighters. So that's mostly what I'm focusing on, is all of the UAS systems, UGV systems, intermittent or intertangled to these mainnet radios, how that's going to benefit the warfighter. That's probably what my dissertation is going to be on, is radios with UAS systems and like how it benefits the warfighter. That's mostly what I'm working on research wise. But I'm actually about to finish my coursework, so I'm like fairly early into my PhD. But that's like the main thing I want to focus on. Just trying to help the warfighter be at the cutting edge of the battlefield and being that interstitial space between the engineer and the warfighter is like where I see myself going forward. Is trying to bring those two together and like being able to speak the lingo of the two groups that are like often have nothing in common, but trying to help them work
No, man,
together better. Yeah.
that's fantastic stuff, bro. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what advice would you give to a veteran who's actively pursuing a career in tech now?
Learn as much as you can. Right now, I would honestly like networking is a big thing because
Mm.
I think that's like I think most jobs are being won, if you will say that, via your networking and like your network is your net worth, all that. So I think that's really important. Networking before you get out, probably like a year before. Um, Having like relevant certificates or like some type of education. I know like Palantir offers like essentially skill bridges for veterans that are like in the AI space, utilizing that skill bridge. Excuse me. Yeah, use that skill bridge and that CSP if you can. If you don't have a commander that's like, you know, uh, rough, I guess I don't want to use bad words on the podcast, but a prick. Yeah, definitely apply to do a CSP at a relevant place that's doing something in tech, and then leverage your experience as a leader to kind of compensate for your lack of knowledge. And then 100% use that GI Bill. Use tuition assistance and credentials assistance the moment that you know you're going to get out, if not earlier. And then try and develop like certificates or like get like a bachelor's degree or something. That's what I did. And that was like pretty beneficial to getting a job in tech right away. And then using your GI Bill to further your education. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to get as educated as I possibly can, utilizing every like last bit of my GI Bill. And then I'm also obviously on LinkedIn, make sure your LinkedIn looks good. And then just try and network. A lot of guys that are out have been out for a while, like Christian and I, like we want to help teams out as much as possible. So if you're like getting out, like definitely start reaching out to people that are like, we're in first group or we're in the or wherever, and trying to just develop that network, because there's a lot of us that it's like we're in a fraternity together, you know what I mean? We're always trying to help the bros out.
No, for sure, man. And I think so. I was just on a podcast with Riley Grupo. She's a former Army infantry officer.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we talked about was precisely that, is the need to network. And she's
Mhm.
I like the quote that she said. Basically, is like your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
And the reality is that's one thing that the military doesn't necessarily teach you how to do. Right? Is how to network.
Yeah.
Primarily because you don't really have to do so in the military, and that's okay in that scenario. But the reality is, as soon as you get out, you absolutely not as soon as you get out. Before you get out,
Yeah.
you need to start networking, because it's so critical to success in the civilian world, and
Yeah.
it's just not a part of military life. Is networking, communicating, actively reaching out to people who are already in that field, trying to see how you can sort of start getting into that system. And I didn't realize
Yeah.
that until I got out, the importance thereof. But luckily, I've been able to leverage that a lot recently, and in my time as a vet now. But
Mhm.
man, it's the kind of thing that I wish I would have known before I got out, had the importance of networking early.
Yeah. And definitely like there's so many nonprofits now, like you can't throw a rock without hitting a nonprofit. Utilize the nonprofits for people that want to help out. And then the nonprofits, LinkedIn, like the thing about the military too, and I think a lot of vets need to understand this, you're working on like a common goal because you're all in the same mission space. So, like for you could go to another ODA and ask them like the Delta for whatever, or I could go to across the causeway to another company, and that more than likely they're going to help me out, because we're all like in the same like gang more or less, and we're all got this commonality. We're trying to like work towards something. That is not necessarily the case in the civilian world. Everybody's got their own thing going on, so you need to be your own biggest advocate realistically, and you need to go and network, like you said. Yeah, just definitely the earlier the better. Like if you have a LinkedIn right now and you're like 3 years out and you start networking with people, and like you're posting on there like I do or like you do, and you're like about relevant stuff within the technology space, people will notice that, people will appreciate that, and people want to be part of your story. And definitely utilize all the nonprofits that are out there to help veterans, because there's a boatload of them. And then definitely like get that resume right. That's one thing a lot of guys struggle with coming out of the military, is a resume. Either they don't know how to write it, which there's plenty of like help out there, especially now with AI. I mean, like there's so many like resume builders with AI, but also your skills are more valuable, like your soft skills or like your actual more technical skills are a lot more valuable than you may perceive. Just know how to translate them into like the relevant field or topic that you want to go into. So
Michael, I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much
that is,
for joining me on the podcast. Where can people find you? Is there anything in particular that you want people to know about you? How can people connect with you? I would love to kind of, get folks, routed your way so they can see everything you're doing and learn more from you, man.
yeah, just on LinkedIn, Michael Bears, Bares, just add me on there, follow. That's mostly where I'm on. And then It's pretty much the only place I'm at where I'm talking about anything. I did want to start a podcast. It's going to be like a historical, like video essay podcast. I was going to actually, my first podcast was going to be about like the Desert Storm era, but I started doing this PhD and it just started beating me up. So I had to like put that on pause. That's what this whole set is, was going to eventually be that podcast, but that'll eventually be a thing. But yeah, I'm just mostly on LinkedIn if you want to follow me or add me on there.
Awesome, man. Absolutely, man. I will post your LinkedIn in the description. Yeah, man. It's seriously, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you. Conversing, it's great to see how well you're doing and all the fantastic and incredible things that you're doing, man. Congratulations. Seriously,
Yeah, dude.
it's awesome to see all the phenomenal things that you're doing, bro. But
Yeah, I don't want to sound weird, but I'm super proud of you, bro. Like you're doing great things, and the fact that you're helping out dudes, veterans, looking at all the stuff that you're doing. That's a Perez I know. PG we used to call you. People don't know us, but he was actually Christian was the platoon guide in basic, like the entire time, all like 14 weeks. But understandably, because he is a good leader.
and thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it, man. And yeah, dude, this will not be the last time that we catch up, dude. Well,
Yeah, dude.
ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the Vector Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you on